Okay, and so this is the last lecture before the next coursework, and so we're covering mostly two parts, and the first part is using something called the Heroku, and this allows you to run your Node.js backend on the server rather than on your local computer. And so we already mentioned, and partly because you cannot run the Node.js on GitHub pages, and that's why we do that. And also, and we'll cover a little bit more about the fetch. And we covered the fetch briefly and how to send GET requests. But now, because we support more types of requests, we need to send other type of requests, including put, post, and delete. And so we'll show some examples and how to do these with fetch. And once we complete both of these, and we'll go through the requirement for coursework too, and answer your questions if there's any. In terms of questions, actually, for the coursework, I can also answer them during the lab this week, which is just to answer the questions mostly. Okay, and so we have seen this diagram a few times, and it shows the three main parts of a complete app, well, including the front end and the server and the database. So for the second coursework, we're mostly working on the server. This is where all the code goes. And the data will go to a database, which is MongoDB. But really, there's not too much code to write. You just have to create an instance of Atlas and insert some data. And also for the front end, you will be reusing what you created in coursework 1 with some small changes in terms of getting the data. So now when getting the data, you should use fetch and to get data from the Node.js server. But that's the only change needed. So most of the things will be done here. Okay, and in terms of where these things are hosted, and for the front end, you can run from your local computer, but we also showed you that you can do this and by hosting it on the GitHub pages. And in that sense, it will be already running online. And this part, we can't do it online yet because we haven't covered it and how to do so, which is what we're trying to do today. And for this part and the MongoDB, and it's already online, we are using the Mongo Atlas, which is online version or online hosting of MongoDB. Okay, and currently, if the front end is on GitHub pages, and it will not be able to access the server if it's running on your local computer. Just because GitHub pages, which is on the kind of public internet, they cannot access and your local node.js server, which is running on your computer, just because security reasons. Okay, so what we'll do is instead, running locally, we'll put the middleware onto a server called the Heroku. And this requires almost no changes to your code whatsoever. If it's running locally, it should run fine and on Heroku. And the main difference will be the Heroku is a public server, so you don't have any restrictions in terms of accessing it. Everybody should be able to. So that would allow you, the front end, to access it easily. And also, more importantly, and once this is completed, all three parts, the front, the middleware, or the server, and the database will be all online. That means the entire app would work, and for anybody, they don't need to access anything from your computer. So you can demonstrate. But that also means, for example, when we do the Postman testing, and you can actually using the online version, you don't need the local installed one once the server is online. The Heroku is online. Okay, and so we're going to just cover briefly how do you use Heroku, and it's just a website, and so you just go there and you need to create an account, but also and very quickly, and it's actually provide and many other languages. You can have a server. It's mostly to host and backend servers, but it doesn't have to be Node.js. Node.js is one of the options, and it has many other options. Okay, so this is how do I say? There's a term to call this type of service and call the platform as a service. And here the platform represents the Node.js backend. And there will be other things like say software as service and infrastructure as service and so on and so forth. And you can see, and these are some other languages and that can support, and they're supported by Heroku. And so Node, of course, and there's Java, PHP, Python. So most of these popular languages, and you can run it. You can create a server using them, for example, using Python and host it on Heroku. Okay, and as before, I'm not going to using the free tier, and it has a limit on the resources that's available, but completely fine for our purposes. We just run a very simple backend. That's more than enough. Okay, and other cloud providers also provide similar services, but we will not cover them here. Okay, so one thing we'll do is we're going to deploy from GitHub to Heroku. And so what means we're going to save your GitHub backend code. Sorry, he saved the Node.js code or the server code on GitHub using a repository. And just the same, you have done that for the front end. And you probably should have done this already. Okay. And so one of the benefits doing this is say you don't have to change your existing workflow. For example, later on, when you push any changes and to the GitHub repository, and the Heroku server will be updated automatically. You don't have to do anything. And also it does not requires you to allow some additional tools and the Heroku command line tools on your computer. So this is needed if you want to upload the code from your local computer directly to Heroku instead of going through GitHub. Yeah, as I mentioned before, and if you change your backend, you just need to push the changes to GitHub repository, and then Heroku will be updated automatically. It will automatically pull the changes from the GitHub repository. Okay, and then so I assume most of you would not have used Heroku before, and the first thing you need to do is go to the website and create an account. I think this should be probably the easiest thing for you. So, and this will be the sign up page as I showed before. And I guess there's nothing really to choose here, and very standard in terms of role. And you can choose student or any other you seem fit. Okay, and then once you logged in, and this should be what it looks like. So because I'm already having an account, so I'm gonna just log in now. Okay, and so mine looks slightly different than this. And because this is kind of your first time and log into your Heroku account, so you don't have anything yet. Here, I already have 2 instances created, so that's why it looks like that. And in your case, and we need to create a new app. So this will be your backend, okay? But first, we just want to briefly talk about the start script. We already mentioned this before, and so you should set up the start, and under the scripts, and you have start, and followed by the actual command to start your server. And this becomes critical for Heroku, and because this is the only way the Heroku knows how to start your server. And it does not know which is your main file, what parameters should use when you're starting the server, etc., etc. So it will run npm start to start your server. So you must have a start script. Otherwise, and you will not be able to, the Heroku will not be able to start your server. And there's no particular command you can do that and Heroku to say. Okay. Also, and this is the second change you have to make. And you need to let the server, Heroku server, to change which port that runs on. So previously, we manually, when we run the server locally, we will set the port to 3,300 or any other numbers you can choose. But when it's running on the Heroku server, and the port number is actually decided by the Heroku, and because only one server or one Heroku backend can use 3,000, not all server can use the same port. So it has to use many different port numbers for different instance. Okay, and so what you do is you need to add these two lines. And so previously you would just say app.listen. So here is the express app. You just say app.listen 3000. Okay, in this case, the port either is process.environment.port. Okay, and so this is kind of like a predefined Node.js object, and it will get its environment object, and this will get you the port number, which is set by the server. So when you run this locally, this will by default be empty. And then in that case, and it will use 3000, and because the OR here. And when this runs on this Heroku, and this value will not be empty, then the port number will be this. And so basically, and if you change your app.listen 3000 to replace that with these two lines, and the code will run both locally and on Heroku server. And locally, it will be 3000. And when on Heroku, the number will be set to whatever number, the port number Heroku chooses. Okay, and then, as I said, to do this, you need to have your have your backend code on the GitHub repository, which I think you should be able at least know how to do if you haven't done that already. Okay, and then and this comes the part, and in terms of related to one of the requirements in the second coursework is to have separate repository for the front end and the back end. And so one of the recommended way to do this is you still leave the same repository you did. You leave the repository you did for your front end, and just as it is, running your front end from the GitHub pages, and then you have a separate repository that hosted your backend code, which is the Node.js code, which that will be linked to your Heroku accounts and then can be used to start the server. So that's what meant by have two separate repositories. Okay, and also I can't remember if we mentioned this before, and it's actually quite important now, and including the .git ignore file. And so this is just a file, and you can choose to add it, and when you create a new repository, and you can also manually add this later. So basically, it's just a text file, and if you save it, the name as .git ignore, and the Git will take it, and it will be used by your repository. There's nothing special to that. Just make sure that the file name is like that, and you put in the root directory of your repository folder. Okay, And what this one does, and it tells Git what files you do not want to include in the repository. And for example, there's some temporary files generated by the systems. And in our case, you don't want to include in all the module files. For example, you would need to install the Express module, and it actually comes with quite a few other modules as well. And these are not needed. These are not your code. People can easily download and install them if they need to. And you don't need to include that in your repository, which will make your size much smaller. Okay, and so what GitHub did, it actually also has many templates, and which listed all the kind of pre-configured a list of type of file types. That is not necessary, depends on the type of the project you are doing. So for example, it has a specific type for node. So it knows, say the node modules files is not necessary in some other files. Okay, and also you can manually add this file, as I said before, and it's just text file, and you can use it to exclude files and even folders. Okay, and I might just show you very quickly. For example, if I'm creating a new repository, where's a new repository? Okay, and this is a new resource, and then you can choose add, git ignore, and then choose and a different template, and you have the template for different languages. And in our case, we just need node one, and it will have node, and it will later on. Maybe it's easy actually just to show you what it looks like, what the files contains. Let's see. No, not this one. Maybe this one. Okay, and so you can see it has a file if you click. So it currently only have this. So this is actually the one I manually created. And if you use a template from the GitHub, it has more information in there. So this here is only just says, I don't want including the node underscore modules directory. That's all it is. Okay. And then you can see, and these are some other things that comes with the template, and either would be fine. The main concern now is just node underscore module directory, which actually can get quite big quickly, very quickly. Okay, and this is about if you have already created a local folder and you want to link it to a GitHub repository. And previously, and what I recommended is you would go to GitHub and you create a new repository first, which is an empty one, and then you clone it to your computer and then copy the files you created to there. So this way, the repository is already linked to the repository on the GitHub server. But this is actually also possible. For example, you already have a local server and you want to link it to a repository you created on GitHub. Okay, and I have a question from Francisco saying, why not include the modules on GitHub? And the problem, the issue with that is the modules themselves. For example, I'm not sure if you can, it does not include. And for example, here, this is my apologies if it's too small. I hope you can see. And here I have node module and directory, and it has quite a few files. Okay, and these files, as I said, the people can easily install them quite quickly from the internet and the node module repository. There's nothing special. The only thing different or unique to your project is these code you created. And that's the only part And the problem is, and this folder can get big very quickly. And it is quite common to have a node underscore module and subdirectory with several gigabytes in size. That makes it update and download much, much slower. So actually, so if you created a server like the one I did here, which does not have a node module, a node underscore module subdirectory, but here okay, I'm gonna come back to the questions in a second. And so here in my package.json file, it will list all the modules I need. And so for the people, other people say cloning this repository, and all they need to do is in their terminal and go to the particular directory where the project is, and just run npm install without anything. Usually we would say npm install, maybe the express, this installed a particular module. But if you just run npm install, and it will go to the package.json and download and install everything listed under the dependencies. So that's a quick way to install everything you need. Okay, and then a question in terms of the getting the running the backend on Heroku. So obviously you need the files and the files under here, node underscore modules, and so needs those modules and to run the server. But you don't need to have to worry, and Heroku would automatically download those modules to have the server running. So again, you don't need to do anything particular. Lisa asked, say, do you need 10 commits for coursework too? Yeah, I think so, but we're going to go through that as we go through the requirements for coursework too. Okay, so here I'm listed a few steps in terms of you already have a folder on your local computer and you want to link it to a repository you created on GitHub. Okay, and so you might want to create the .git ignore file to excluding node underscore module subdirectory or other things if it does not exist yet. Okay, and there's a few more steps. And first you want to say git add dot. So the dot means current directory, what it will add everything in the existing, sorry, I forgot that. So first you have to do git init in a directory, and then that turns that directory into a GitHub repository. And that basically means git initialize, that turns a directory into a GitHub repository. Sorry, Git repository, not GitHub. Otherwise, it's just a folder. Okay, add git ignore, and this one is optional, but probably needed, and for the coursework submission. And then what you need to do, you need to add all the existing files to the repository, and assume there's already some files there, but they are not included or being tracked by the Git by default. And so you do this git.add dot, which will add everything, so that including files or subdirectories, or the files and the subdirectories. And then you make a commit. And so this is just as any other commit. So you make a commit, which in this case, and this part, and is just a message, because you always need to type a message when you do commit. And so it just, the actual text is up to you, but usually say this is the first commit, because that's the first time you're adding the files to the repository and making commit. Okay. And then you need to create a repository on the GitHub. And again, when you go back you need to run, actually, this is one line, and it was split into two just because, and it's quite long here. This will be inside the folder, which you done all these git init and git add and git commit. You say git remote add origin and followed by the URL. This is the URL you would get from the GitHub pages. Okay, so essentially this one set a remote server, link that to your local repository. Okay, and here this URL will be different, depends on, so if you go to the and GitHub repository, and you would go back, and you would get say some URL here, and just that one there. Okay. And finally, you push your changes to the server. Okay, so Git push, and this set the remote here, and you want to call the server origin. That's the default name. That's have to match this name here. Yeah, and here the main and is the branch name of the server. So it used to call the master, but now I think by default, and the branch is called the main on GitHub, and so why it's called the main. But anyway, you can push this to different branches. It's up to you, but this is branch name. Okay, and so as you can see, this is a bit more work compared to, say, you clone an empty repository from the GitHub and just add files to that. I think that's usually the easier one. There's more work to be here, and also more chance to get wrong here. Okay, now we get back to the Heroku, and what you need to do is to create a new app. I think I can still do here. I can say create a new app. Okay, and then you need to choose a name for your app, and this name actually will be unique. For example, I already have one called the CST3145, and then you won't be able to use it anymore. So what's how you is not available anymore. You have to come up with some other names, and then choose a region. So the region means where you are. It doesn't, I think it's only affect where the server is hosted. And you could choose United States. That means they will be hosted on the server on the United States. And there might be implications, for example, GDP items data access, and performance-wise, I think the difference is very small. And then you created the app. Okay. And then once you go, you choose. So once you finish this, let's go to 2022. Hopefully I won't be charged. Okay, and then you go here, and then by default, it actually goes to deploy part. So this basically tells you how the Heroku gonna get the code from the GitHub server, and you choose GitHub. And in this case, I'm already have account connected, so it will show up here. And then you need to type in the name of your repository. In this case, I call the CST3145. Basically, it's this one. That's the name, CST3145 server. And you click. Do I need to search? Yeah. And you connect. Okay. So that's the process. And so you choose deploy and then go to GitHub. And the first time to ask you to authorize Heroku access to GitHub repository, especially if it's private ones. And in my case, I already did that, so they didn't ask again. Okay, and then you need to type in your repository name here, do the search, and finally connect. And then when you do the connect, it will copy the code over from the repository. Okay, and then say, okay, and you choose the branch to deploy. And in many cases, you only have one branch, either called the master or main. And also it's useful to enable automatic deploys. That means when they're changed, it will automatically get the changes from the repository. Yeah, so I'm going to choose master and then click that. It says automatically. So you don't need to manually load the changes from the server anymore. Okay, and now you need to, on the setting tabs, to add build pack. And so basically, this is just to tell Heroku and what language you're using to build the server. As we mentioned before, it can be many different languages. Okay, so we go to settings and then add build pack. These are the common ones. There's other ones. This essentially and just tells Heroku what server you are using. Okay, so we are not using Node.js. Okay. Okay, now to actually deploy, which would also install actually install or run the build pack. So go back to deploy. Yeah, here. So deploy branch. So you can always come here to manually deploy, but I already said we choose the automatic deploy. So that would, and you can see, okay, this is what we're doing. You can see it's actually downloading the files, actually starting a virtual machine, which is a server, and a run. Okay, there's some messages which we saw. Okay, and yeah, so this is exactly what we saw here. We had a few green ticks here. It means, okay, your apps are successfully deployed. That means the server is running now. Sorry, the server is deployed now. Okay, and then there are two options. You can just click open app, it will run, but also you'll see a URL. That's the URL you can type in the browser or give it to someone else. You'll be able to access your server from here. So the URL is always the name of your app. In this case would be CST3145-2022 and .herokuapp.com. The .heroku.app.com is always the same. It's the difference is changed, depends on the server name part. And so I should see it. Where did I find it? Domains. Is it here?
In setting.
Settings. Oh yeah, in settings. And so this will be the URL that's for your app to see it on the server. Okay, I'm gonna choose just open that. Okay, you can see that's the default message of the root path, and it just sends a text, and depends on what's in your code, probably different. But if you can see that, then you know your server is running properly, people can access it. And you can see the URL, which is CST3145-2022.herokuapp.com. Okay, so that's more or less it. So it's up and running now.
Would you need to start the server as well before you?
No, I don't think once it's deployed, you can open the app, it should start. And so I think this is before you make the changes, you might get an error. And so if it's Git error, it's normal. Okay. Or there's some problem with your code, so it didn't start properly. And you can to see, so this is the part which is Git. And slightly more difficult is to debugging the code. So when you run this server locally, you can easily see all the error message in the console. And you can do something very similar on Heroku as well. So to see the logs, which is similar to the message you see in the terminal or the command line, and go to more and see the logs. So I can go more and view logs. Okay. And so even the server is running properly, and you can still come here. And if there's any error, you would see the error message here. And so you can see, okay, it's starting the process and with npm start. That's why we need to set up the npm. And this is the actual command. And then do something, there's some warning message just because I might still using some old driver or old settings in the driver, etc., etc. Yeah. And so here it says state change from starting to up. So starting will be, say, booting the server machine. The up will be, okay, everything is loaded, you can accepting request. So this is where actually the first line. So it says there's a request, which just requests the root path / and it will log it out. So if I type something like collection products, okay, and so here you would see, okay, there's another request, and its path says /collection / products, and this is actually my products collection in my database. I also installed some Chrome extension. Then you will see the JSON files a bit better. So if I refresh the page, so you actually return the JSON format in a bit easier way to just rather than show everything as a text. Okay, and back, and you might have errors. This is how you can see error message. And but also you can just actually run a console, so that gives you something similar to what you would have in command line or terminal locally. Just choose and say run console. And still here in more, run console. Then you can say run npm start. This will starting the server. Yeah. And you get some error message here, and you can see it's running. And if there's any error message or shown here, I have a warning. And whereas here, and it has some errors. Okay, and so this is actually an error, and not about the code itself, but about accessing the online MongoDB, the MongoDB Atlas. We talked about this at the very beginning of when we first mentioned the MongoDB Atlas. And for security reasons, you have to add your IP address and to the allowed IP address settings inside MongoDB Atlas. So when you first run Heroku, and the Heroku server IP address will not be added here. So you need to go to network addresses and then add it. Okay, but there's difficulty for Heroku, and because the IP address changes. So every time you run your app, the IP address will change. It's not the same. Okay, and so what we'll do is we basically just say allow access from anywhere. That's what we did. And as a result, you will see something like this added to your allowed IP addresses. That basically just means everything, and which is already the case for me. So if I go to my cloud installation, and the security and the network access, and so I have seen something here already. That means it would allow any IP address. So that's why when I try to run the my backend on Heroku, it didn't give me any error. If you haven't, it just says add IP address. Oh, it does not have this. It only says add current IP address. It does not have that option anymore. And so you used to have this button that seems not there anymore, or maybe because I already added it, so it's not there anymore. But I mean, you could just manually type in 0.0.0.0/0, and that also works. Okay, and sometimes you might need to restart the server and just click more and restart, and it to automatically run the npm start once the server starts. Just think of here, the dyno is like the virtual server. It's like a machine, and it runs node inside on the server, and they're called dynos. Okay, and once it's working, you can run. It can testing the various routes, the collection/messages, and this you can only do get in the browser, but you can also run in the Postman, the other type of request, the get post and so on. Okay, and that's everything in terms of the backend. So as you can see, just to put the your Node.js server on Heroku doesn't really require any code. You just need to set up an account and then load the code from the GitHub repository. Okay, and then I'll also talk quickly about the front end. So as I mentioned before, you can reuse your Coursework 1 front end for Coursework 2, but you need to make some small changes because you need to load data from the actually from MongoDB through the Node.js server. It's going to talk to the Node.js server instead of load from a local farm. So this is where you need to add more fetch to your front-end code. But in terms of the looks and fields, functions, that shouldn't change anything. Okay, yeah. So this is the example of using fetch, and which we already covered that before. Here, we didn't specify any type of request, so that will be just get. And here will be the URL, and because now you can access from Heroku, then you can replace this part, right? This part with your actual Heroku server address. In our case, will be, and actually first this could be probably will be HTTPS. I can see, yeah, it's HTTPS. And then this will be CST3145-2022.herokuapp.com, and then followed by the actual path for different routes. And these then here, this part are the same as before. So you get the response and you turn that into JSON, and then you get a JSON array basically. And then, for example, and you give that to the store.products. Maybe the store will be your view app. Yeah, that's your view app. And products will be a local JSON object, and which will then store all the list of this array of JSON objects from the whatever you retrieved from the server. Okay. And here, and I just want to show you some examples of doing other type of requests. As we said, you need to save something and you need to use put and post, or update something to post or post. Okay, and then so the syntax will be slightly more complex compared to this one. Here, really the syntax is quite straightforward. You fetch with a URL and then a .then, which is the callback function, and all these will be run when this fetch request is completed. And here, you need add a bit more. So we fetch URL, we need to add this request object and then .zen. Okay, so the addition is this request object, which, for example, need to set the type of request. And sometimes, for example, you need to including they call the payload or actual data you need to send to the server. For example, you want to save the information about new user. So a JSON object, including the user name and email, for example, will be part of the request object. Yeah, so the type of the request and some header, for example, including is always say, including some data, and it's JSON, is a data type, and then including the actual JSON data in the body part. So this is a kind of equivalent to what you would do in a Postman request. It's just in the Postman you do this user interface. You don't have to write code to do that. So I'm just running the Postman locally, okay? And you can see this is a put request. That's a URL. I would choose say body, and the role, the file type will be JSON. So this is something you would set in the request header, but this time you have to write a little bit more code. And then the actual data I want to send is say email is new email. Put, yeah, and then this will be inside the body of your fetch request. Okay, so what it looks like will be something like this. Okay, and we're going to create, this is a JSON object, which is information you're going to add to your server. And then you do the fetch. So that's the part will be different. Okay, and so this part is the same, and you need the URL to send the request to, and then you have the dot ODs. That's again the same. You get the response. If you know it's going to be a JSON, you run the JSON, then you have the result of kind of basically a string file, sorry, and passing the JSON object, and you can log or do something else with it. Okay, and so the main difference is this part here, which is a JSON object. As I mentioned before, this is the request object. Yeah, and so you specify a method as post. Okay, and this can be put, delete, or even get. That'll be fine. And you set the headers. Here you set the content type is application/JSON. So now I'm setting the type, data type as JSON. That's what you need to do. You can say content type, I think application/text or something, or even image. Okay, and there will be a reference somewhere to tell you what are the options here. Okay, and then the body is the actual JSON object you want to send. Okay, in this case, we're going to send a new product, which was we defined here. It's a very simple one, which only contains title and price. But we can't and send this new product as a JavaScript JSON object. We still have to send it as a text. So we have to say JSON string file, which turns this into basically a text string. And for a human who look at it, there's really literally no difference. It just still sees text. But for computer, it's different. And before you do the JSON string file, this is a JSON object. Once you do that, and this just becomes a line of text or characters. It's no longer a JSON object. Yeah. Okay. That's it. Okay.
So what did you tell about the error when using Heroku? there was something about the error you mentioned.
Yeah, that error is about on the server side, sorry, on the database end. And for the MongoDB Atlas, you have to allow the IP address of your Heroku backend, because Heroku backend try to access the database when they send any request. And usually you have to manually add each IP address. But for our case, we're going to just add this. If you haven't already had that thing there, that basically means allows any IP address to access the MongoDB Atlas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I tried the IP address thing, but it still is giving like errors. I don't know why.
Yeah. And so if you had this in your MongoDB Atlas and you still get error, we also talk about that. You should either check the log here, view log.
Yeah.
And to see if the error message is there, if there is, what it is. Also, you could run the code, the backend code, and locally, and that should run locally as well. And first, make sure it has no errors when run locally before you
The
deploy.
code was fine. The code is fine. It just in the log it says error crashed, something like that.
Yeah, then you should go there and check what exactly the error is causing the crash. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And I think we covered this already before. And sometimes you might have this and access control allow headers error. Essentially, it means an access control different from different servers, and you need to add something like this. But also, and we previously talked about using the course module from Express, and if you just do that, which does the same as this, would solve if there's any, but it shouldn't if you already use the course. Also, yeah, and that's the thing. So if you, for example, add these code to your backend, and then once you push that to the GitHub repository, and then the Heroku server will be automatically updated. The code there will also be automatically updated. Okay, and that's everything about the Heroku and fetch in terms of, say, sending post. Oh, and just very quickly, and so when you need to do other type of method, then you change this to put and delete or other type. Yeah, so you still need saying headers for a put request because you need something that you want to update in the database. And for the delete, you don't even need this body part anymore. And because maybe you still need, you need this, for example, send an email. So you won't need these. But mostly just change the value here to say put or delete. Then you can send other type of request. And again, you can first testing this locally and just using the Postman as we showed before. You can type in your URL here, and then you change your different method here, putting the URL and then actual header, add the body here, and to test. Okay, that's all in terms of the Heroku and the fetch. Is there any other question?
Do you put this in the server part of this?
Sorry, and what about the server?
Do you put this in the server?
Oh, you mean the code I'm currently showing, does that go to the server? No, this should go into the front end. And so this is doing a fetch, and which is currently trying to get to the list of the products or list of the lessons or something. So that should go to the front end. And if you want to say display a list of lessons in your view app, you need to get the list of lessons from the MongoDB, and you need to use a fetch, probably simpler than that. Actually, more like this one. So you define your app and your local data and its variables. And then when the instance is created, you would run this function, which actually fetch some data from the server. Or this particular one is post. So it could be when you're adding a new product to, so you maybe have a page, allow users to enter information about new products, and it has a button called submit or something. And when user clicks that button, it will run this fetch request and would save whatever user entered into the database. So this code goes to the front end, part of the Vue app. Okay, yeah. Is any questions? Any other questions? And okay, I'm gonna just use we've got maybe half an hour left. I'm gonna go through the requirement, and for the second coursework, let me go there. Okay, and as usual, the requirement is in the module handbook. And if you go to the assessment section, and then coursework 2. Okay. And so first, and for coursework 2, and there's some general requirements, and these applies to both the group and individual work. And so you must use Node, and you must do REST API, and you must use Express, and you must use the fetch. You're not allowed to use Ajax or other libraries. Okay. And then you must host the code on GitHub repository with at least 10 commits. So these are very similar to the first coursework. Okay. And this must be a new repository. So as I explained, you put the backend, you keep the first coursework repository, you create a new one, put in the backend code in there, which will be then linked to the GitHub repository. Sorry, the Heroku.
What happens you put them all together? Would that be all right? You put them all the things together. All files in one GitHub page. Would that be all right? Or
no, I would actually recommend doing separately, and
because I've done it so far.
Put it in
I've
the
done it
one
so far and it
repository.
worked.
Sorry?
And I've done it so far, it worked. So
I'm not sure. Can you say it again?
I've done one file, one GitHub, and it worked anyway. So do I need 2 or 1?
You have done your work, and there's 2 or 1.
1, yeah. Because you say you want to do 2 GitHub.
Yeah.
Can I just do 1 GitHub and then that'll be all right?
Okay, let's discuss at the lab. So we have to look at exactly what you code, but the answer usually will be just 2 will be better.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, and it must be demonstrated. Okay. Okay, and then additional requirements, and for the individual work, and it must use MongoDB Atlas, which is what we been discussed, and don't use a local one or a different, like say MySQL or some other database. Yeah. And when you're connecting to the MongoDB, use a native NodeDB and Node.js drive only. Don't use something like a Mongoose. Okay. And then the Node backend or server must be hosted on Heroku, which we covered today. And you're not allowed to do this and for the coursework using the locally. Okay. I assume these are all obvious. I mean, basically just you need to use the things we covered in the lecture. That's all. Okay, and in terms of actual submission itself, and can be a little bit complicated. There's quite a few things to submit. And first, it has to be a zip file and can't be more than 10 megabytes. And if you're including the node underscore modules folder, it might be over that limit. Okay.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
So I think I'm seeing here it says we need to have a Git two repositories for the node and express and the front end.
Yeah.
So now when we're linking the when we're linking Git to Heroku, which are we linking, the one with the node and express, or we're linking both of them?
No, and so the Heroku and only links to the node and express code. And because node is, sorry, Heroku is for the backend, and it will not be actually be able to run the front end view code.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we're creating the GitHub pages for the front end, we'll add a Git Ignore for the node and express.
Say it again.
So when we're creating a Git repository for the front end,
For the backend, you mean?
sorry, for the I'm talking about the front end pages. That's the view code.
Okay.
Yeah, so we create we use a Git Ignore for the node and express folders.
And for the front, so first you should already have a Git repository for the front end. That should
Okay.
comes as a part of that is part of the coursework 1.
Okay.
And also for that repository, you don't need to do Git ignore node modules because the front end does not use any node modules.
Oh.
In the front end, you only use view, and the view is just loaded using a script source equal to some server links. There's no node modules in the front end code, so you don't need to Git ignore those. I mean, you can do it, but basically it doesn't do anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then where exactly do we use Git Ignore?
Sorry?
Where exactly do we use Git Ignore?
So the Git ignore is for the backend repository.
Okay.
For the node and express, and it would have the node underscore modules subdirectory with many other files in there. That's not needed for the repository.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So there's quite a few things you need to submit. And the first, we need the URL and to your backend repository. Okay. But also need the URL to your front-end repository, as I explained. And this could be the same repository as you used for the coursework 1, and with some changes. Okay, and someone asked, can we use single file component? The answer is still no. Wait till the coursework 3 to use that. The single file component only relates to the front end, and we not really want to change anything to the front end for this coursework. And it's really just for the back end. We keep the changes to the front end view code as minimal, just to change how you access the database. Ooh. Sorry, I must have clicked on something I shouldn't. Okay. So you will need at least these 2 collections in the MongoDB. So you need a collection which is stored a list of lessons, which you will display on the page. And they have another another collection called orders, which will save the orders user placed and using the front end. Okay. And you need to export these from the MongoDB, so I can see they are. And because I would not be able to access your MongoDB Atlas access, So I can't see what's in there. So you need to export those. I think if you go to Atlas and browse collections. Web store. Okay, I was hoping to see if there's any way you can export them here in the Atlas, which I don't see an option. So
I think you can do it from the compass.
yeah, that's what it mentioned. But if we can do, okay, you still have to use. Huh? Okay, you still have to use, okay. So in this case, you still have to use Campus. So if you haven't installed it, you have to install it. And also, and there's a link, and there's actually a link in here. So it tells you how to do that. And the link is not obvious because it does not change colors or anything. But I already did actually. Yeah. This one goes to here and tells you how to export in Campus. Okay, and this I said before, and use Git Ignore and do not including the node underscore module folder. I mean, if you really don't want to use Git Ignore, you have to do this manually. Otherwise, you might not be able to fit everything in the limit of the file size. Okay, and also you need to submit the front-end code. And so, as I said, we try to keep the change to the front-end minimal at this stage. In the third coursework, we're going to do more proper refactoring of the front-end. But here, in terms of front-end, the only part you change is add more fetches, either retrieving or saving data to MongoDB. That's the only changes you need. Any other changes you can introduce, but that's not required. For example, how the pages, sorry, how the lessons information are displayed, how they are laid out, etc., etc. Okay, and then finally, and you need to create a postman for all different routes, and you probably need that for the testing or when you're writing the code anyway. Again, there's a link here, which goes to the postman page about exporting. And again, it's not obvious, but if you go open the PDF page and click, and it will go there. Yeah, I think in terms of exporting, it's probably quite straightforward once you have the software installed. Okay, and now we go to the actual marking scheme, and there's 4% for just MongoDB, and you need have at least these two collections, one for the lesson information. You need at least these: topic, price, location, and the space available. And another collection for order, you need at least the name, phone number, lesson ID, and number of space. So you need to save the information, who is the person and made the booking or purchased the lesson, and which lesson they purchased, and number of space they purchased. Okay, you need to at least these two information. Collection in MongoDB. And this is very easy, and you don't need to write any code. You can do this manually, just create these two collections. Okay, and then the next part will be the middleware. And so this is not referred to Express. This is actually refers to the middleware created using Express. And you need two: one is logger, and the other one is to serve static files. And so actually we cover the both, and in the lecture, So if you go to week 10 lecture, Express and middleware, and if you look at the lecture slides, and okay, so this is the examples of the static file server, and which is actually a more complex one. And before that, and you would have something like this, app.use as a function, and it just log incoming request, the URL and date. So that's all we need in terms of the log middleware. Go back here, go here, okay. And okay, and then the actual REST API, and you need one get, one post, one put, and at least one postman request for each of these, right? So actually we didn't cover all the types, but for the get is return all the lessons, post will be saving an order. So when an user enter the username and the phone number, and I can't remember now, what do you request? Phone number and the name, and press the submit. Previously it just display a message. Now it should actually send the post request to the server and would actually save the order to the MongoDB. Yeah. And then the put route would update the number of available space in the lesson collection. So basically, when user made an order or submitted an order, it would book some space, for example, and it booked the 2 space in math lesson. And then the record in the database, it should update the space available for the math, which is basically reduced by 2. So once user submitted an order, the lesson affected, its number of space should be reduced accordingly using the put route. Okay, and then at least one postman request is created for each of these routes. So you have 3. You should at least have 3 postman requests. Sorry, postman request, 1 get, post, and 1 put. Okay, and next is the fetch. And so this again, this will be in the front end. So you need a fetch to retrieve the lessons using the get route, and use a fetch to save an order, which is the post, and finally a fetch to update the lesson space using put. After some of the space is already booked, then you need to reduce. Okay, and then finally, and there's a search, and similar to for the coursework, first coursework, this is more challenging component, and so it's a bit harder, and we didn't cover. And in the lecture, you need to do your research, and the functionality is actually the same. So you still do a full text search. Now the search needs to be done, and in the backend, not in the front end. Okay, and some of you already did that in the first coursework, but it's all search in the front end. And so what it means is you cannot just retrieve everything to all the lessons into the front end and then do a search of the retrieved results. You have to do the actual search in the MongoDB. So you have to construct a query which was sent to the database, will retrieve whatever is required as the search results. Does that make sense?
So excuse me, sir. Please,
Yeah.
could you say that part again? Could you repeat it on the search?
Okay, and the difference here is, say, the search needs to be performed in the MongoDB, not in the front end, the view part. And so basically, it should not work if it's something has nothing to do with Express and MongoDB. Then that's not what requested. So what happened is you need to send most likely you need to create a route for the search, and then you need to send a request to the route together, for example, with the search text strings, for example, and you would get specific results back from there, if that makes sense. So I want to avoid the possible workaround, and you can just retrieve all the lessons from the backend and using the Git. And then you do whatever code you created for the first coursework. And so that's not, you will not get any mark if you do something like that. And because you're not doing the search and to this database, but you're really doing the search in the front end. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, yes, it does.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So you're not allowed to use library, and you need to code this. I mean, it's not that difficult. Okay. Again, so you need to, in terms of the front end, you need to create some fetch request, which would send this search request to the backend, which will then return the results. So you need a front end fetch, and then you need the backend, and this most likely to be a route, which will receive your fetch request, actually do the search in the database. Okay. And then return the results, which can be then displayed in the front end. Okay, and the last part is probably the most difficult. Again, it's the same to the user, it's the same feature. So as you start typing, it was starting to retrieve the results from the database. Okay, except here, every time you update the results, there should be a new query, and just be aware and in terms of the constraints. For example, and it takes much longer to get the results back from the database compared to, say, if the files is, all the information is available locally in the browser. Yeah, okay, and that's everything in terms of the individual work. And any question or?
I'm just checking about the 10 commits. Yeah.
Yeah.
You do two Git repository, yeah? How many commits do you need?
No. And the 10 commits is only for the backend repository. You will have a repository for the front end. You make more changes. That's okay. I'm only asking the 10 commits is for the backend. So you should have a new repository for your backend code, the Node and the Express. And that needs to at least have 10 commits.
The front end don't need any.
Yeah, the front end, you can have more. It doesn't really matter how many more you have or not have anymore. Usually you would, because you need to make changes to add the fetch request.
Okay.
Okay, and any other question or? And also, I mean, and the lab this week, and we're going to finish the lab exercise from last week, which we couldn't finish the Heroku part, but also there's a time for you to answer your questions.